I don't need.
Good morning, Josh.
I don't need this thing. I'm loud enough, right? Apparently, the pastors trust me with an awful lot because I'm teaching today, but nobody was here to do announcements, so I'm doing announcements. I've never done this before. So, I mean, it looks like you just read here, so that's what I'm going to do. Greg and them are at Strong Tower. I wish, he'll be back probably next week to talk a little bit about that. Isabel, can you please come down? Yeah, honey, well. That's all right. That's what they do, right? But please don't knock that over and break it. But he was at Strong Tower, so he'll have a lot to share, I'm sure, about that. But also what's an extreme need is Jen and Greg are both doing the children's church, and they really, really need another person. Actually, they like two, so that they can have a 3-month rotation. With the kids and that, it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to probably do 1 or 2 here, not a month long, but I'll do 1 or 2 here. When we were here for VBS, I had a lot of fun being back there with Randy doing it. I thought it was really cool. So I think I just encourage you guys to consider that. There's a youth group laser tag on July 17th, so that's this Wednesday. Looks like $5. That's pretty cool. Coffee house, my wife is wanting to do. If you guys have ever been to that before, you just kind of come and, speak or do a song or bring some kind of, painting or something like that. And it's just a time to just fellowship and worship and have fun. We've done those multiple times. There's a women's daybreak conference, so there's 2 of them. One of them is during the day, I think, here locally at Harvester. That's September 27th through 28th. And then there's a women's one in Branson in October. And Billy just came and asked me about the men's one. I don't know much about a men's one yet, but anyway. So I think that is all. And then you were reminding me, I need to bring the kids up. Can you guys, all the kids come to the front? Here, can you see here, Isabel? Xander's going to come sit next to you? It is. Yeah, is that all? You're the only kids that we have? I think there are some out there, isn't there? All right, well. So these are the kids that are going to go back. You want to sit over here? We got some more. So we have a matching 2 and then a third that's doing his own thing. As they get older, that's what they do, right? So I want to pray for you guys to go back, and there's be people back there to teach you the Word of God, and also just, I think they do a lot of coloring pages for Isabel and stuff. They bring all kinds of fun stuff for us. So I'll pray for you guys, okay? Huh? What's in there? Can I see? Oh, rocks. Isabel loves rocks too. All right, well, you can put them back in. Thank you for showing me. Dear Holy Father, Lord, we pray for these children. They see things so different than we do. They see little things in our lives that are just so amazing, like rocks. And as adults, we look at that and we don't really see any glory in that, but you've created everything, and we're so grateful for that. And I pray that you would, your Holy Spirit would come for these kids and help them learn back there and help them grow into strong leaders. Let me pray. Amen. All right, guys, you're dismissed. Oh, okay. He didn't know his shirt was green, guys. Do you want to go back? Well, then you can't stand up here. You got to go over there somewhere. Sorry, honey. No. Eva? Eva? The most awkward sermon you've ever had. All right. I don't know if they put honey, you have to go sit down. I'm so sorry. So I don't know if they put the title up there, but I don't know if you guys have ever heard about, some people will tell you that if you want patience, not to pray for it. I hear a lot of amens on that. Why would that be? Because if you pray for it, God will test you on it. Today my message is on suffering. So that being said, don't teach a sermon on suffering either. That's my suggestion. No, I'm kidding. Although we have had a lot of trials for us in the last month, and so, I've been planning this for about a month, so I don't know if they're related or not. But that's okay. It helps me learn. It helps me grow, and that's what we're going to talk about here today. So the first thing I want to say about suffering is a lot of people in our world today will tell you, well, because we have suffering or pain or death in life, then there must not be a God. A lot of people will try to use that as an example to disprove him. And what I want to do today, because there's multiple questions that come up with this topic, I want to try to do is help us understand it a little bit better. So, a couple big questions. The non-believers claim suffering and evil disprove him. Let's talk about that today. Does it actually disprove him? Why does suffering exist? I can't really answer that question entirely other than we know exactly why. We don't know why God chose to allow it exactly. We know we're going to unpack that a little bit. But God is God, and he knows more than we do. And so I'm going to try to give us a chance to understand that from our own point of view as well. Should we not expect to suffer? Even believers? Should we not expect to suffer at all? That's another question. A lot of people who are Christians don't think that we should have suffering in our lives, or we should have all this money, or we should have all these easy life. That's not true. But there are people that believe that. How can an all-loving God allow suffering? And then suffering cannot possibly be a good thing. Can it? Can suffering be good? We're going to look at that as well. So the first thing I want to do is look at the basis. So to the answer, why we have suffering in our world today, we're going to go to Genesis 3. So if anybody wants to fold to that, it's going to be on top here. This is the NIV version. So Genesis 3, this is right here at verse 1. Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?" The woman said to the serpent, "We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say, you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die." "You will not certainly die," the serpent said to the woman, "for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye, and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took it and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. So the Garden of Eden, going up to this point, God created the world. He created everything. He created man to be over the animals, and he still gave them a choice. So they had the tree in the middle of the garden, because if he didn't give them that choice, he couldn't. We couldn't actually choose him to love him. And so what did we do? Right away, I don't know the time, but obviously we took of the fruit. We brought sin into the world, and sin is the basis of suffering. Sin is what brought suffering into the world, not God, although he had certainly knew. So that's why I can't really answer the question. God knew we were going to eat of the tree. He knew we were going to make some bad choices, and he had a plan for that. But overall, the basis of suffering is that we made that choice, and we brought it upon ourselves. So that makes me conclude that God allows suffering. Because of the fall, it was introduced in our lives, and it's sin, which has birthed suffering. So I'm going to try to give us a little bit of an example of what God does for us, but also we can unpack that for what we do for our children as well. So what does a good father do for their children? As Jesus said, God is the only good father. So whenever oftentimes I might mention, as a good father, I'm not mentioning it as a perfect father. But as parents, we try to do the right thing for our kids. But what does a good father do? God do? He comforts them. So we have in 2 Corinthians 1, 3 through 5. He cares for them. In Deuteronomy, we got lots. This is a short list, guys. But comforting. Can we comfort someone who's not dealing with anything like pain or something wrong? Does someone really need to be comforted if they're not feeling down or sad or anything like that? Can we care for someone who doesn't have a need? If sin wasn't introduced, we wouldn't have to worry about eating. But right now, we have to find food. Some people don't have food. What do? We care for them. That's what we do for our kids as well, and then disciplines them. God disciplines us. And we do that for our kids as well. But none of these things that I've listed here now, there's many, many more things that a good father would do, what our God does for us and what we would do for our kids. But none of those spare suffering or remove it. So, what that makes me think is that God can use suffering. He uses suffering to accomplish what he wants. He accomplishes these things through it. So God is using suffering now because of why? Because we brought it, but he has a way of using it to help us. So does that mean suffering is a good thing? For me, there's a couple of examples. Again, this list is short, but there's a couple of examples that I can say that suffering results in a good thing. The first one on the list I can't attest to, but I've seen it happen, childbirth. I've seen 2 of them. Doesn't look so pleasant. That's one of the curses, actually. God said it will be painful, so I believe it. And in childbirth, though, as a mother, that's like one of the most loving things you can do, is to allow your child to come. When you find that you're pregnant, there's a lot is coming. There's going to be pain. There's going to be a lot of hardship to allow that child to come. And then when the child does come, they turn into the 2 I have. But that's a loving thing, right? That's a loving thing that we do. And I haven't experienced that, but Amy has. So what that makes me think about is the contrast to a person who chooses not to allow their baby to come. There's some various reasons that it could be, there's a medical reason or whatever, but there's people also that say, well, I don't really feel like dealing with that, or I don't want my body to hurt. I don't want to go through that. And I typically don't want to get into political things, but this is not a political issue. I don't believe that, because abortion is the life of a child. It's a human life. God values them. He's made them all. Political thing would be, what do we do with all this money, the taxes? How do we disperse that? All those things. But this is a moral problem, not a political problem. And that's why it matters. That's why it matters, and that's why we should do what we can to help people if they're thinking about something like this, or encourage them to remind them that that child is a gift from God. Anyway, I got off track. Training. Example is just an example, but running a marathon. I don't know if you guys know, but I'm planning to do a half marathon. I don't know why I signed up for it, but that's okay. It takes a lot of work, right? There's a lot of pain that goes along with it. I'm sore today because of what I did yesterday. But there's a lot of good things, right? We see children, they're a wonderful blessing. Training, and when we get to the end, what a great thing. Paul uses marathon as an example of what kind of race we should be running. We're not going to run one where everything's going to happen just right. We're going to run one where there's going to be trials, and we're going to fight, and we're going to fight, and we're going to fight our whole lives. That's why he was mentioning that. When we persevere through a trial, I wouldn't say this happens all the time, but I would say that you could probably talk to some people who would say, I had this thing that happened in my life, and it was really, really hard for me, but I'm glad it happened. I learned from that, and I wouldn't change it. So there's an example there where a person said, it was hard, but that's okay. I'm glad it happened. For the greater good. So, for example, God knows so much more than we do. And so when we think of it like, our children don't really understand why we do certain things, like discipline them. But God, as us, as his children, we don't fully understand him either. I like the analogy with the soda can, with the ocean. The ocean's, think about the ocean as God's mind. And in our minds, a soda can, you can only get so much of it. Well, my kid doesn't understand that either, right? She gets a soda can of me, which isn't much. So, we have a verse here in James that's actually, Peter also mentions it as well. It's almost very, very similar. But this is in James 1, verse 2. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking in anything. Now, the context of this verse is James is writing to people who are being persecuted. So we do know that he's referring to the kind of suffering that comes from doing good. We're going to talk about that next. But we can also take that same thing and say, we are going to experience other trials and pain from suffering, and to persevere that makes you mature, makes you complete. That's kind of the difference between some kids, the other. They might be the same age, but some have gone through so much more, and they are more mature. So that brings me to the next slide. There are different types of suffering, I think. There's two. There's probably more, but I'm going to just break it into two. There's suffering because of sin. We already talked about that. And there's suffering for the gospel. And later we're going to have a verse that we're going to read that's really going to outline that. So there's two different types of suffering in my mind. Are they really that different, though? Can we claim that Christians don't suffer the same way from sin? Or should a Christian only suffer because of the gospel and not actually suffer because of sin? I don't know about you, but I know I'm not perfect, and I know I still sin. But even if I was, there's someone out there that isn't. And if I'm walking down the street and someone's drunk and they hit me, that's suffering that I'm going to endure for somebody else's mistake, somebody else's sin. So I don't think as Christians we can strip those apart. And anybody who thinks so, we can just continue to read verses like this one here, 1 Peter 2. This is 1 Peter 2:20. But how is it, to your credit, if you receive a beating for doing what is wrong and endure it? But if you suffer for doing good and endure it, this is commendable before God. Well, right there he just mentioned two of them. One of them for something you did, and the other one for something good you did, and someone doesn't like it, and they are going to persecute you for it. I would say that we're included. To this you were called, because of Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. I heard someone recently say, we're not supposed to follow Jesus. Where did they get that idea? It's all over. I don't know where they got that idea. Anyway, I can't dispute it when I read verses like that. 22, he committed no sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. When they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he did make no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to the one who judges justly. He himself bore our sins in his body on the cross so that we might die to sins and live for righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. How many times have you heard that? For you were like sheep going astray, but now you have returned to the shepherd and the overseer of your souls. That's a pretty brutal section of verses there. I don't think that we should be, I don't think we should be spared of any kind of suffering when I read that. Jesus was given as an example, and what does he say here? The best example is if people are making fun of you or hurting you, you're supposed to stay silent, or you're not supposed to retaliate against them. Just let God take care of that problem, because he's the one who judges properly, not us. And that's really the biggest problem. As people who are non-believers think they're the judge, they think, oh, I know all about it. Suffering is a obviously an injustice. God is not all-knowing. He's not all-powerful. He's not loving because he allowed it. isn't that the original sin? The original sin is pride. To think that we know. That's what Satan did for us in the garden. So, how can a loving God do this? Well, the first thing that a loving God did is save us from our own destruction. The loving God didn't allow us to live in the garden forever. He removed us from the garden. After we made that sin, he removed us from the garden so that we wouldn't live forever, because if we ate of the tree of life, we would live forever. You know, a lot of people will say, I don't want to live forever. That's a non-believer comment. I don't want to live forever. And the reason why they say it is because they're living in sin. We are living in sin in this world. We are fighting sin here. That's why we don't want to live forever. We don't want to live forever in this. But because of him allowing us to leave the garden, allowing suffering to continue in our lives, he had a better plan. He can do that and use suffering for other things. So, he can help do it to prevent us from being prideful. I just said that. 2 Corinthians 12:17. I forgot my, or 12:7. I forgot my physical Bible, but therefore, in order to keep from becoming conceited, I was given a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. And then he actually goes on to boast about the weaknesses that he has so that he can glorify God. That's a pretty humble person that said that. I don't know, remember, was that Paul? I know I'm not there yet. That's okay. But the point being is, pride is one of the worst things that we could have, and that is one of the things that he uses to break us down. He uses that to break us down. One of the things that we were going through this week is my step-grandpa had passed away on Tuesday or Monday or Tuesday. But the funeral was on Friday. And he was dying of cancer. He knew it was terminal. He had it about a year ago, and they kind of gave him a time frame. And so he met with the pastor. They actually did a fantastic job over there. It's a Baptist church near my house on Hemsath. Brian, he did a fantastic job in outlining what's going on with death and why we're dealing with this. But one of the things that Jim told him when they were planning the funeral, and he already knew that he was going to die of cancer at some point, Jim said, the Lord's way is perfect. I don't want to make a commitment here, but if I was in a position like that, I hope that's what I would say, too. Uh-oh, what did I do? But if I would be in that position, I hope not. But if I did, I hope that that's my response. That's a wonderful thing that Jim said there, was to say that God is perfect. I don't really care about this cancer I have. It doesn't really matter to me. All I care about is I know where I'm going, and I want his name to be proclaimed as a result of it. So God uses suffering to break us down, bring us to more dependence on him. 2 Corinthians 12:9. So, is that second? No, it's right there. Therefore I boast all the more in the glad. I don't think that's 2 Corinthians, guys. Yeah, I guess so. Anyway, regardless, he used it to break us down so we have more dependence on him. Some of the other things that we dealt with this week, or not this week necessarily, but the last month, was realization that my son is very mobile. He's a runner. He goes all over the place now. He is just all over. I'll catch him on the bunk bed, reaching over, trying to grab the fan. And I'm going, oh my goodness. But what it helps me do is helps me realize, what can I control, really? And what do I want to do as a response? So as a parent, do I... one of the things I thought about is, I could stick him in a cage. If I stick him in a cage, then he can't hurt himself. Is that loving? My mom's laughing because she knows about how crazy he is. But anyway, so the cage isn't really a great idea, but I could chain him to a fence or something like that, or, give him a little more freedom. But, God gave us freedom. He gave us freedom to do lots of things. He gave us freedom, unfortunately, to choose the wrong thing. So as parents, we have to juggle between what do we allow, or what can we do? Is there something else I could do? Is it make sure I lock the door or do something to protect him, but I still allow him to do something? Yesterday I was sitting, giving him breakfast, right at the table. I pull out we got these little bagels. I laid them down, and I guess he had bagels too many times, so he didn't really like that idea. And he was kind of crying about it. Next thing you know, he slips, boom, whacks his head on the tile. But I'm standing right here. I'm like, it happened so fast, there was no way I was going to catch him. Is that my fault for allowing him to climb on the chair and get his bagel? I don't know, maybe. So we can only do so much. What can we control? We can't control that he's breathing. I can't control that his heart is pumping. I can't control that his brain is functioning. It helps me realize that God is in control of all of that, not me. And so there's only so much we can do. So I can give so much more to him to control that situation than me. And anytime I think I can control it, it brings upon a lot of anxiety and stress that I can't handle. That's why God does take care of it. This is kind of a weird point, but I think God's suffering is pleasing to God. That's what we just read. It said here, it's commendable. So when you're suffering for doing good things, not necessarily bad things, but good things, like sharing the gospel and you're being persecuted for it, that's commendable. So God uses that kind of to test us a little bit. See, all right, are you really going to do what I asked you to do, even if you're going to suffer for it? He molds us into what he wants us to be. God uses suffering to help us learn. That's what we do with our kids. Therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. So he's using that kind of thing. This verse doesn't necessarily have a context of suffering, but it's certainly in there. It's certainly involved. Anytime we obey, suffering is going to happen at some point in our world, because that's what it said here in Peter. So how can a loving God do that? Well, I want to try to give an illustration. It's really funny, my slides here. My slides are in capital, and I guess the PowerPoint puts all the words in that title capital, and then when I uploaded it today to the ARP software, it was not. It's so funny because I type so often, I'm used to capitalizing the first letters of my sentences, so actually a lot of those were okay. This one I was like, oh, it's capitalized, it's no big deal. So what I have here, what I want to illustrate is a piece of wood, and I want to try to imagine like us being this piece of wood, right? So when we accept Christ, he starts to do things in our lives, right? When you're resisting sin, you start running into a lot of pain, a lot of struggle, a lot of hardship, trying to resist the sin that you had been in. And so this is kind of what he does. Oh, cleaning people. But if this is you, how does it feel? This block doesn't really understand what's going on. God, that's not fun. Why do you keep doing that to me? Right? So if we're this piece of wood, it doesn't feel very good right now. Right? All this pain that you've gone through, and let me tell you, I know what that's like because I hit my finger too. And actually, what he's trying to do, he's trying to make into this. He's trying to make you into something beautiful. But at the beginning, it doesn't feel like that. You don't understand that. And this isn't perfect. Tom Wright's not here, but Amy said, you should ask Tom to make that for you. And I procrastinated and never got to it. But Tom is a very good word worker, and he would have done a fantastic job on this. But anyway, I had a lot of fun. I did cut my finger, so. But here on the left, you can kind of see the transformation. So even if you're at that stage, you kind of get a better picture of what he's doing, but it's still, you're not really fully understanding yet. And then when you get to the far side here, you start to realize, okay, he's making me something beautiful, and I should accept that. So in your life, whenever you're running into various suffering, just remember, God is making you into what he wants you to be. And because we are sin, we're this nasty-looking block. But this is what he wants to make you into. And of course, God can make a much better one than me. So anyway, he does it with human lives, not pieces of wood. But it brings me into the body of Christ, another example, kind of an illustration of what we can be like sometimes. This is in 1 Corinthians chapter 2. Paul's writing to the Corinthian church because there's a lot of turmoil, there's a lot of problems. And, I think by reading this, you can clearly see that there are people fighting and arguing over who's doing what or what value each part is. So this is down in verse 12. Just as a body, oh, and by the way, Paul writes so weird, so I might mess this up. It's always backwards. Just as a body though one has many parts, but all its many parts form one body, so it is with Christ. So Christ is one body, we form up him. For we are all baptized by one Spirit so that to form one body, whether Jews or Gentiles, slave or free, and we are all given the Spirit, one Spirit to drink. Even so, the body is not made up of one part, but many. Now, if the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, it would not for that reason stop being part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would the sense of hearing be? If the whole body were an ear, where would the sense of smell be? You can keep going on and on with those. But in fact, God has placed the parts in the body, every one of them, just as he wanted them to be. If they were all one part, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, but one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I don't need you, and the hand cannot say to the feet, I don't need you. On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And the parts that we think are less honorable, we treat with special honor, and the parts that are unpresentable are treated with special modesty. While our presentable parts need no special treatment, but God has put the body together, giving greater honor to the parts that lacked it, so that there should be no division in the body. But that its parts should have equal concern for each other. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. So this is more of taking that from just me and what I'm dealing with and my suffering and pain and moving it into us as a group. And here he's saying, each of us has a part in this, and some of us don't look very special, but we are very important. And we're all going to suffer together. At least we should. We should rally around that. If somebody's going through something, we should rally around that. And if somebody gets honored for something, we should all be excited about it. But he takes the idea of, like for me, I use a block of wood. It's just one piece, but there's many cells in it, I guess, if you want to call it. But here he's using the body because God transforms bodies. He transforms us, our soul, more than our physical body. So Paul's just trying to illustrate that when he uses an example. And another example I can give that might help as well is like a house. Sometimes, your house, it has wood that builds up the frames. It has nails. It has paint. It has electricity. That's what I want to be, is electricity. That's pretty cool. So the house has so many pieces. But when the master, God, picks you up and you happen to be a nail, What have you gone through? You've been molded into a nail for number one. But two, he lays you up against this piece of wood and starts smacking you with a hammer. It's not very pleasant for the piece of wood either. But you're sitting there complaining because I'm the nail. This isn't very fun for me. But if you look at the whole picture, he's building a mansion, or he's building a house, or he's building whatever it is. And we're just a piece of that. So when we just happen to be the nail, we can't choose if we're the nail or the piece of wood or the lights. But that's what he's saying here. But we can rejoice in it with the others. And when we get to the end, we realize how wonderful it really is. Even all that suffering you went through, it's a wonderful thing that's at the end. So, we know, in this case, that God God didn't spare Jesus of suffering either. So we can look at that. So God allowed his son to suffer. Why should we expect not to? God is perfect. Jesus is perfect. He was brought here to die for us. And the gospel is we are not perfect. We need something to save us. We can't be in God's presence if we're not perfect. God knew that. That was his plan all along. He knew what we would end up doing at some point. He was going to transform us into something, but he was going to bring someone who could save us. And that's what Jesus is. But he didn't spare Jesus' suffering. If you imagine, God saying, hey, look, I'm going to send my son. He's going to be a king. He's perfect, and there's nothing wrong. And this guy, just trust him. I know that you ever go to like a camp where you're trying to put together a house with somebody, or you go through a hardship with someone, and you go so close to that person when you're going through that. You're helping each other work, or whatever it is you're doing. You grow close to that person. You may not even know them. Like a lot of people go on mission trips. They don't even know the person at all. And by the end of the week, they're like, I don't want to leave. I don't want to leave these people. They're wonderful. We love working with them. But we went through some kind of whatever it is, helping kids get food or making a place for them to live, whatever it is. We're suffering together, but we enjoy it together. God sent Jesus not to just rule over us the first time. He sent it to come out in the manger. I wasn't born in a manger. I was born in a pretty decent hospital. My kids were. How low can you get? Jesus was homeless. Amy showed me a song by Rich Mullins. Jesus, we're saved on the shoulders of a homeless man. Jesus was homeless. And we look at that and say, well, we need to have a big house, and I'm going through the process of trying to find a house that's a little bit bigger for my kids so they don't wake each other up. Is that really a big problem? I don't know. But if I didn't have a house, I would probably be not feeling so great. God gives us blessings. It doesn't mean that we necessarily have to say we can't have them. But there are people in the world that don't have them. And he does say that we should love and care for those that don't have it. Anyway, he sent Jesus to die and suffer for us so he could be perfect. Here's a little bit of Isaiah 53, which is a fantastic section. If you have not actually read that specifically yourself, you should. This was written before Jesus came, probably around 500 years. But one of the things that in here says, in Isaiah 53 verse 10, yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and to cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days. And the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. Okay, so that prosper, the word prosper, because we've been kind of talking about that. People typically say, well, God wants us to prosper. Yeah, that's at the end, right, when we get to heaven. He says here, he will see his offspring. Who's the offspring? That's us. To prolong our days. And through the Lord, he made his life an offering for sin. So if we can accept Jesus, we can have that prosperity that everyone wants to talk about, your health and wealth. And I don't know about you, but as I get older, I get worse. I don't know if I've gotten better as I've gotten older. So I don't know what they say, and I don't know why these people run into that, but clearly something isn't right, because as I get older, more things hurt. But the whole thing comes back to this is the gospel. What we just talked about is the gospel. It all comes back to this. To put our trust in him, even though they're suffering. We don't know exactly why God chose this as our path, but we certainly know at least why it happened. We chose it ourselves. By taking the fruit, by being prideful into thinking we could be like God. Let me just say, I'm pretty prideful. Someone would say, well, why do I have to suffer for something that Adam or Eve did? Well, are you prideful? We can end it right there. But one day that suffering will end. God promises that as well, and it's something we talked about at the funeral on Friday. Revelation 21:4, he will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the older thing of things has passed away. The Garden of Eden is restored. So that's what we were just talking about. No more death. Honestly, I think death is a good thing at this point because we're in sin. God allowed us to die because if we didn't, we would live in sin forever. So dying is not a bad thing because we get to go to a restored body, to the restored Garden of Eden. Sorry about that. The Garden of Eden is restored was not part of that verse. Sorry. That was a note that I had here. So we have that. So we know that it will come one day. So I want to try to, unpack a little of some of the takeaways about what we talked about today. One, suffering does not disprove God. We can see how suffering can be used by him by examples with our kids. We can see that right away because I don't spare Isabel or Ezra of any kind of suffering if we think it's a good thing. When Isabel was 2, actually she wasn't even 2 yet. You guys have seen it. She fell and hit an ottoman-like thing and ripped her tooth out. She doesn't have a tooth right here. You guys probably, some people will go, hey, she doesn't have a tooth. Yeah, she hasn't had a tooth for 2 years. But she got it ripped out, and Amy calls me, at work, and they're getting in the ambulance, and they're going up there, and I'm rushing as quick as I can to get there. And by the time I get there, everything's pretty settled down. I mean, the blood, like Amy's, out of your head, blood just comes flying out. Like it's crazy how much blood is involved. And so they had that all rectified. Pretty much everything was settled at that point. They showed me her tooth. But there was one thing that really still had to happen, and that was her lip. When she fell, she bit her lip and ripped a piece of it. And it was still hanging on. Sorry, I didn't mean to be graphic. But, so, for me, what does a father do? Oh boy, Sam's not having a good time here. What does a good father do? Maybe you need to walk out. A good father does is they say, we need to put her in a pillowcase and you need to hold her down so we can stitch her. And of course they want me to do it, right? They want the parent to do it because it's comforting. So I'm doing 2 things here. I'm being comforting, and she's going through a pain that she doesn't understand, but I do. I'm thinking to myself, this is the right thing to do. I don't know what would have happened. I don't know if you I won't get too worse. But I don't know what would have happened, right? The first thing I can think of is we need to put that back in there so we can heal, right? We know that we will heal. And so they had me do that. They numbed her and everything, and we go home that night, and they told us simple stuff, right? So we got a soup, and next thing you know, I look up and it's gone. Her stitch is gone. What do we do? The next thing I can think of is, okay, we got to go back up there. So not only did she have to go through this once, she had to go through it twice, But what makes it even worse is when we got there, that doctor goes, oh, no, he did it. I tied 5 knots and I don't numb. What? Well, yeah, if you numb it, it puffs up and you can't always know you got flesh. I'm like, okay. So what does that mean? Back to the pillowcase. And I had to hold her down, and she was looking at me, and she said, Daddy, no. Daddy. I'm holding her down. But I knew it was the right thing for her. She doesn't understand. She doesn't even know. She doesn't even remember this happened anymore. So it was something temporary. We knew it was temporary. And I had to do the right thing. She still loves me today. She went through an immense amount of suffering, I'm sure, and she still loves me today. So we can take that same analogy. I know you've seen Greg do this. We have a rope, right? And on one end, there is where we were born. And on the other end, it just goes, out the door, if you want to say. We take that rope and we grab just a little bit further from it and we say, this is where you die. So here's where you were born, here's where you die, and that's the rest of your life. The rope's not infinitely long, but we can imagine that the rope is infinitely long. And we could say, all right, when I'm here, the rope's all the way over there, I don't remember that. Isabel doesn't remember. She's 4 now. So you don't remember any of it. So as we get further and further and further away from the suffering that we see today that we think is so evil and so terrible, it's going to be a distant memory once we get there, once we get to the final thing. God's using this time to test us to turn to him and accept him. And this time that we're running now is so short in comparison. Suffering makes us into what God wants us to be. If we choose him, it's a rough path. If we choose him, it's not like he said, hey, follow me, and I'll give you all these wonderful things. The one rich man came to him and says, well, I haven't done anything wrong. I've held all the commandments. And he says, well, you have an awful lot of money. Why don't you sell that, give it to the poor, and come with me? And the guy went home sad because he didn't really want to do that. That's pride up in us that says, I don't want to do that. But Jesus didn't say it was going to be easy. And I know that's it's kind of a false thing we have a tendency to portray, that it's going to be easy. People walking down the street right now think, oh, there's those people in that church that are perfect. We're not perfect. That's what we got to make sure that people realize, that we aren't perfect. And that's okay. But through suffering, he's going to make us into that. Like we talked about, working out your salvation. Slowly throughout your life, you're going to go from this to maybe something close to this. You may not make it there. That's okay. You get to go to heaven anyway. So life is, or suffering is limited and short-lived, which is what I gave with the rope. And Sam's not back, so I don't know where he's at, but he can't handle the rest of it. Suffering does not mean that God does not love you. That's one of the most important things I wanted to say. I hope you got that out of this today, because my daughter knows I love her. This morning, try to be realistic with her, but sometimes she'll say things like, well, I don't want to be with you anymore. I said, well, you know what? When you get older, you can do that. Or she'll say, I don't like this. I don't like this. I said, well, it's our house. When you get older, you can move out and have your own rules. And she said, well, Daddy, I don't want to move out. I don't want to go. You need to stay with me forever. And to her, getting to 16 feels like forever, right? But, I tell her, honey, we're not going to leave you. It's okay. She's the one that's going to leave us. She doesn't know that now. But I would say that right now, I don't know if you've heard it said, but there's kind of like 3 things that we're in at one time. When it comes to suffering, there's really 3 things. 1, we're either in the trial, in the suffering, in the pain, whatever it is, we're leaving it. So if we can use Isabel's analogy, she was in it when she was getting her in the hospital. When we get her out, she's healing from it. And then later, she's going in. So then the other state is going into a trial. So she might feel like, oh, everything's all right. Next thing she knows, she's into something else. So we're always going to be one of these 3 states. Very rarely will you say, oh, everything's perfect for me right now. Everything's great. So we're in one of those three states. We're either going into a trial, we're in a trial, or we're just now leaving it. But that doesn't mean that God doesn't love you. So here at the end, I wanted to do something a little bit differently, but this is a really tough topic that I taught on today. I know that some people might be in that intense suffering, and certainly if you need prayer, we can just walk right back there and pray. But also, too, you might either know someone or you're in something that you want to pray about, and typically we will stand up here and we'll have a closing prayer, but I want to do a little differently. I want to give you guys a chance to have your own prayer for whatever it is that you're going through or whatever it is that you're fighting with. And if you are in that, I don't know what my next trial is, then pray for that. Pray for that other person or somebody else you know. But instead, I want to give you guys a minute to pray yourself for whatever it is that you want to pray for. And maybe it's not suffering. Maybe it's something else. I don't care. It's all right. But I want to give you guys a chance to do that. I know that the worship team thinks it's kind of weird to, or we've had mentioned that it's kind of weird to not walk up later because there's kind of a gap. So I'm just going to wave the worship team up a little earlier. But I want to give you guys a chance to do that right now.